All right, we are back to Transmissions from a Dying Planet with Gorightly and Viz. And I believe we got Andy Colvin here as well. Viz, take it away.
Andy, you with us?
I am.
All right, great. I want to let everybody know also that what we're going to be talking about today, Adam has insight and a deeper history with than I do, but Andy was with me just recently on a show that's up on thinkerbeeaten.com/the Knoll, and there were a couple items that he had hit while he was doing this one kind of specialized show with us, and I asked if he would kind of reprise what he was beginning back then. So there's a little history there. As Adam knows, and perhaps a lot of you folks know, that Andy's been on with me, I guess I don't know how many years now and how many hours. I think he probably holds the record for most shows and most hours logged. He does kind of a special thing where he looks at news stories of every day, of every week, of every month, and he would come on and we would talk about them. And also you can go to his website, andycolvin.com. He is an author who has done a lot of work with Mothman, the Garuda mythology, and you can check out his books there as well. So, Andy, thanks for coming back on again. And what would you like to do as far as leading off with some of the subject matter that we kind of broached but didn't go in depth with the other day?
Yeah, we can talk about that. That was some of the recent stuff in physics, the debate that Jack Sarfati's been putting forth, that it's sort of based on his experience when he was a kid with the so-called God phone, where he was speaking with a orbiting intelligence around the Earth, and that dovetailed exactly when Puharish was doing the same thing with Uri Geller and some other writers and people. Philip K. Dick, Anton Wilson had those kinds of experiences. So he's now wrapped that up into a physics theorem that our reality is being controlled by a hologram from the future that's generated by a computer. Now, I don't know. My thing is I've sort of looked at this, and some synchronicities have come up, and I sort of go by synchronicity that has sort of given me a sort of a way to meld all these into one kind of idea, which turns out to be exactly what John Keel was saying about the phenomenon, which is that it is computer-like, but it's consciousness based.
What does that mean, really? I mean, in a way, this almost sounds like some of the subjects we were speaking with the guests in the first hour involving computers and consciousness. Can you kind of rough out how that connection could be possible?
Yeah, it's it's kind of an Eastern view, so I don't know if many people are familiar with it, but
that's what we asked.
Consciousness is the source of manifestation, but it's very impersonal at the same time. Because it's so vast, we're just a subset of it. But we hold all the information that it holds in our cells. That whole idea is really important. That holograms work that way. Every particle of a hologram has the total information of the hologram in it, and that's kind of the way reality in the Eastern view works. And the debate, seems to be centered on a computer, though. I don't know that they're making the distinction. Some people are, actually. There's the one-mind interpretation, which I think is trying to make that kind of distinction.
Explain one mind. You mean like one big human collectiveness?
Yes. Yeah. Just what I was saying, that consciousness is the source of manifestation, but it's not the particular consciousness you have in your necessarily the way you're looking at life right now. We've talked about that before, where people get tripped up thinking that since they can't make an apple manifest right in front of them, that this is a bogus theory, but it's not, because it works on a different scale and in a different way. But I mean, one aspect of this kind of thing is when you're looking at these theories, you have to sift through the background of it and try to figure out where it's coming from, because in a way this may be another sort of way to deter people from looking at it in that Eastern way. That's a lot of what goes on, is that Western countries just tend to go at it the opposite way. In the case of the God phone, if Sarfati was being programmed, say, because this is what the 9 is about. It's about a long-term Masonic, almost, I think, group that's been around over 100 years and longer even, having this idea that they use, I think, to just counteract. There's some reason why it's out there, and I'm wondering if Sarfati's approach here is another manifestation of the 9, because he actually was involved with a lot of the players in that circle.
Let me ask you this.
And it kind of gets to the JFK thing, which Adam might be interested in. I've got a little quote I can read.
All right, before you go there, let me ask you one thing, though. So hang on to that, please. But the 9 is generational. Obviously, they've been around for over 100 years. Are they strictly human or strictly other terrestrial, or what?
I think it's a British covert op almost, using a cult-like approach, which is the standard kind of British intelligence thing. I mean, they did it during the war. They had different groups set up like that.
You have to admit, too, let's face it, and you've been there enough times, and so has Adam, and I don't know the background of the listeners or what their particular bailiwick is when it comes to the kind of information they like to read about. But let's face it, I mean, not only the UK, but, I mean, all of Europe just seems to have been so cloaked in so many saturnine clandestine operations for so long. It's amazing. And I'll tell you something on the side. I really don't understand what this was about, but Chris Knowles would never talk about the 9 with me. And I couldn't even ask him why he wouldn't talk about it. So, I was kind of mystified about that. So, but anyway.
Someone wrote a good book about it, which I read, and I have it, but I can't remember if it's Lyle Watson who's the author. I keep looking him up, and I can't find that book. I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was all about the 9, really. And
you said the author's name is Lyle Watson?
I thought it was Lyle Watson, but I could be wrong.
We can probably find out. We can kick that around in a search engine. But
it had something to do with the coming of the aliens or something like that. That was the title, sort of.
All right.
But they operated in Florida. They had some psychics there they were doing stuff with. And if you look in Puharish's Iceland Papers book, there's an article about their SRI experiments, and they went all over the place doing those experiments. In fact, they were in Ohio in some of the caves doing remote viewing experiments at the time.
Well, hold it right there, too, and also you mentioned of JFK. Adam indicates that we might have a caller. Is that so, Adam?
I believe so. I shall bring him on if you're ready.
Yep.
And caller, are you there? Wanthalam is the name. I think he's on the line. Perhaps not.
All right. Hello, caller. No good, huh?
Anyway.
Sorry for the interruption, but Andy, that's the nature of the business. Just go back to what you said, though, again, about the situation in Ohio and such. Would you just expand on that a little bit more? I didn't want to let that go before we talked about JFK.
Well, the SRI people out in California were doing remote viewing experiments around the globe.
All right, we're talking about Stanford Research Institute, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and this involves a lot of players that are still around, and we know, and it ties into Ira Einhorn and all that stuff that we were talking about. I think we talked a little bit about it on the other show, how Einhorn was into Tesla, and Tesla's kind of a dangerous subject to get into. But that these these folks were being controlled by Bell Telephone, pretty much. That was who set up the first internet, more or less, and Jacques Vallée was involved, and Einhorn, Puharish, and so forth.
All right. And that name, I asked you about it a little bit on the last show that we did, but Einhorn was involved in this, and of course, what he represents to most of us is just some kind of heinous hack and whack killer. Not that we're going to go that far into it, but to the best of your knowledge, and I don't know if Adam knows anything about this either, but...
yes, I do.
Okay, now, can you tell me, are we looking at a setup to get the guy?
Well, that's what Einhorn has intimated over the years, and he was deep into the spooky world, not only tied in with, a partner, really, with Puharish. They were at, can't remember, at some ranch or compound out in the east somewhere back, in the early 70s, doing all these paranormal experiments and supposedly making contact with extraterrestrials during that period. And he also had, he, like Andy was saying, a lot of this was being funded by Bell, and they were using like the first iteration of the internet networking to get a lot of this Tesla-type information out. And one of the guys who was involved in all of this was a CIA guy named Kit Green, who some people have compared to, he's like the real Fox Mulder. And so Einhorn has intimated before, it's hard to pin him down sometimes, but that the CIA was, or somebody were behind the murder, and they set him up basically to silence him. Right, Andy?
Hello, Andy.
Yeah, there was a click on my phone. Okay, go ahead.
That was them.
It was the 9. All right. Now, Andy, do you want to go there with the JFK mention? Now that Adam's with us.
Okay. Yeah.
That plays in. Okay.
Yeah. This is a quote from one of our previous shows. It's a little paragraph here. Lauren Coleman, the Bigfoot researcher, posted a file on a Colonel Maddox who had been in Vietnam and had worked for Bell Helicopter. Now, is there a connection between Bell Telephone and Bell Helicopter, guys? Do you know?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I think Colonel Maddox was in Laos or Cambodia, which means he probably had something to do with the Phoenix program. There was a cell of people working at Bell, this is in Dallas, who were reportedly linked to the JFK assassination. In this cell were Michael Payne and his wife Ruth. They were Oswald's landlords. They owned the Nash Rambler seen leaving Dealey Plaza. They were related to Arthur Young, inventor of the helicopter. Young had been involved in the invocation of the Nine. There's a connection between Michael Payne and Senator John Kerry. Payne's mother, Ruth Forbes Payne, is Kerry's cousin. Let's see, what else we got here. At the time, I thought that maybe Colonel Maddox at Bell was the father of Alvis Maddox, the UFO witness / policeman who found the extra bullet, or was with the guy who was killed who found the extra bullet at Dealey Plaza. And they're from Dallas, and I talk about some synchronicities with me in that neighborhood they lived in, which was really weird. Then it has interested me. Then I say Maddox. The Maddox name is linked to the Nine. Holly Maddox was the name of the woman who was supposedly murdered by Ira Einhorn. Einhorn, in an interview, said that he had worked on this black box technology with Puharish, and that would have happened in that place Adam was just mentioning. Einhorn was close to Puharish. According to Einhorn, they had access to a large amount of silicon chips, and they had a tie-in with a company that made really small ones. So they were able to set up some of these unusual experiments, mind controlling people, basically trying to figure out what the different frequencies did to people, and supposedly they could, affect a whole room of people just with a little device. And you and I were talking about that on the previous show a bit, Viz, if you recall. You there?
Yeah, I am. I hear you.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering about, too, if we can just take a moment, are you coming out now, I believe you are, with another edition of the Mothman?
Yeah, 2 more. These are, I think I'm going to call them the Mothman Speaks, because it's a lot of different letters that I've gotten from people, and some of them are between me and friends and witnesses. Some of it's a little more personal than before, but it's really way more interesting too, in a way.
Well, with all you've collated, I mean, how many pages are we looking at with this next one? Is this going to be a tome or what?
Yeah, that's going to be 450, and then there's a second volume that's going to be 450, and those are basically done, and I'm just about to send them off. So that'll be about 2,000 pages so far.
Remind everybody, we're talking with Andrew Colvin. The website is andycolvin.com. You just heard him speak about his book, and about, we can touch upon that too. I really should. The research he's done with the Mothman, and I guess in a more wider manner about the Garuda legend. And by the way, I don't know, I just want to ask you right now, Andy, I was trying to grab a hold of this when we were talking the other day, because did you hear there was some mention of some avian or Garuda-like creature? It just happened a couple of days ago, and I was trying to grab it to remember what it was, and I didn't. But it was a mention, at least, even it was just like a little soundbite in mainstream news, but I just took note of it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Did anything ring a bell for you this last week or so? And I know you were paying attention for obvious reasons.
I don't remember. I'm not familiar with this story offhand. What?
No, I can't give you anything more about that. I've been trying to bring it back, but I can't. I just made note of it, like, oh, that's interesting that someone would mention it, in this venue, whether it was, All News Radio or whatever. I just should have grabbed it, and I didn't do it.
Well, it reminds me on that Monster Quest episode of Mothman, they had a guy who saw Mothman in Wisconsin that we reported on at the time it happened, and I saw him on the show, and he's got like an Indian name, and he said Mothman floated in front of his car for quite a ways. And then he said an odd thing at the end, which they just threw in, and like at the end of at the credits, where he said everyone around here is sick, is getting sick, and we're being watched. And the way they edited it made it, the show, these shows always try to make Mothman seem demonic, and they kind of did it again in that one. Not as bad maybe, but sort of indirectly, they made it seem like he had maybe killed an animal, which it turned out he hadn't.
When we first got together and you told me about this, I thought the same thing. Of course, it was because of the association with the Point Pleasant Bridge collapse back in the 70s. Why does that happen, though? I mean, is that something that's being deliberately done, or is it just one of these things that gets kind of like just accepted into the culture, and that's kind of where it goes unless you know better?
Well, they make definite choices to spin them that way. So I don't know. I think it could be turned. I think it could be changed very easily if they would just report it in a more neutral way, but they don't.
Well, could part of it be probably what I fell prey to also, and that is, unfortunately, the sightings oftentimes, if not exclusively, and you can tell us if that's the case, seem to be a harbinger of something bad to come. That is, in fact, a warning which could be embraced as just that, but it seems like it's almost like, if you see the Mothman, it's going to hit the fan, so therefore it must be attached to whatever catastrophe follows.
Well, yeah, and also, though, you got to remember that it's working at a bigger, more broad way, though. It's also involved in people's personal lives, sexual relationships, stuff like that. Pollution, I think. Anything that causes stress because, you know, and this is acknowledged in the Mothman story, that Mothman has something to do with the pollution in the TNT area. Radioactive, you know, it's radioactive. I took a reading there. And that's all it was all secret, you know, atomic bomb stuff. But my first thought when he said that was, well, maybe there's some stuff going on in town with the pollution from a chemical plant in that town, which was La Crosse, Wisconsin, and maybe they're being watched because the corporation knows what is going on and is watching people to make sure they don't talk. I mean, this is exactly what happened during Mothman.
All right, we're just going to break this line of questioning.
Let me, before you break that line of question, what does Mothman have to do with our sex lives, Andy?
Well, he shows up a lot when people are getting together or breaking up.
The Mothman hookup?
The Mothman hookup.
Well,
I guess my bigger point here is Mothman is the God phone, but it's a more realistic version. It's a unified version of the whole one-mind interpretation, quantum physics. It's the super spectrum, as Keel called it, working in all these ways. It's almost infinite. But, you know, for some reason people tend to see it as this Birdman. And I think that, I guess my plea to the cryptozoologist is, what harm does it do to look at all the different Birdman myths that we have in the world, and sightings and everything, and put it together into something that makes sense for the whole world, not just, you know, a Judeo-Christian, whatever mechanistic thing it is we're trying to say here, that these have to be real animals that are just hiding. You know, it's some process of consciousness.
Gotcha. So do we want to shift gears, Viz?
Well, yeah, this is kind of interesting. I'd like to see where that's coming from and whether Andy has any input, although let's just see where it's going, because I have an interesting anecdote about this, but go ahead.
Well, let me tell you what's in the chat room here. Somehow this thing about Adorno and the Beatles came up, perhaps related to Tavistock. Hey, Viz, every time you bring up Adorno, no one knows anything about him. What about Adorno and the Beatles? And I wonder why it is no one will address the Adorno thing. Oh, come on, Viz.
Well, let me first ask Andy, are you familiar with this at all?
I will be as soon as you remind me.
All right. To address the person's question.
Oh, you know, the Adorno thing. Yeah, is this what's Adorno?
Well, Theodore Adorno.
The Italian?
Well, growing up in Germany and beat it out just before or while Hitler was coming to power, if I got that correctly. Now, it's John Coleman who fixes Theodore Adorno at Tavistock, and while at Tavistock influenced the Beatles. Now, a couple things. I don't know how to come down on this, but I will say this. Alan Watt believes also that Adorno was involved with the Beatles. There are people who say, without a doubt, some musicians of note, say that the Beatles could not have been putting out what they were putting out with the experimental ways they were doing things as early, I guess, in their commercial career. I mean, obviously they've been playing for a while. So it's Coleman who speaks about Adorno being at Tavistock and influencing the Beatles. Now, if you've ever read anything by Adorno, I mean, he must have been a brilliant guy. I guess you could call him more of a sociologist to a certain degree. When I try to get into whether or not this was factual, because the thing about John Coleman is, as much as you might like the guy, and as much as some of his information may be true, or most of it, it's so anecdotal and not documented that you got to really trust Coleman for it. All right, so I did. I picked up 2 books by Adorno. I mean, the guy is really, a real mind. Now, here's where it gets good. I was talking about this out loud, probably with Watt years ago, or however that went down. Maybe, whatever, it doesn't matter. I get an email from an American in Germany saying, no way, not at all, never happened. So I called a gentleman up in Germany, and I'm saying, well, that's really interesting. I said, would you come on and speak to it? He gave me a couple of titles to read up on. And his take was that Adorno had nothing to do with the Beatles, and nobody can really place him at Tavistock. I know that's unsatisfactory, and it really is a very provocative issue, I must admit. A lot of folks think somebody was working with the Beatles, and I guess they think it's somebody other than George Martin. But I really can't say that I have found anything outside of Coleman's work, and it's not for a lack of effort, I just didn't, that would tie in Adorno with the Beatles at Tavistock, and yet why would Coleman do that? It may be something that's never going to be answered, but that's the best I can do, and I wish I could find out the mystery and whether or not that connection is there. But obviously something was going on with the Beatles early on. But and then the individual, like I said, I talked to, I mean, he really didn't have, his dog in his hunt whatsoever, but he did turn me on to the fact that an associate of his had written 2 books extensively on Adorno and never came up with any of that. So,
Hey, if folks do call in to put something in the chat room saying I'm connected and got a question, because people show up here as dialed in, but then like the one caller wasn't there when we went to his question. So give me a little prompt in the chat room. The person chatting about this, the notorious guest 14, says the Doors were supposedly influenced by Adorno as well. Take that for what it's worth.
Well, if they could cite where they got that from, I mean, I'd be more than interested. Not that I don't trust them. It's just that I would like to find out more about this. And I will say, by the way, that the gentleman in Germany, the expatriated American, even though I spent 40 minutes with him just discussing this, never returned my emails or would talk to me, and I never got him on the show.
Yeah, that was funny. I came across that years and years ago in the, it was like the early 70s. There was a compilation book on rock music, and one of the things in that book was about this whole deal about the Beatles being influenced, and really, I guess it was after, it's when their music started to change directions, wherever that might have been Rubber Soul, or after that this outside influence had came into the scene, and kind of around the time Paul McCartney might or might not have died as well, and replaced by Billy Shears. Anyway, interesting stuff.
Randy Morgans, who does a show, The Threshing Floor, is a musician of note and was in New York for quite some time. And he's the one, and he doesn't give himself over to, wild stuff, but he's the one that said to me something was going on there, and that's why I respect that opinion. He said, and he mentioned some of the things they were doing, and they were the first to do it. And not even before, I would even say before Peppers, when they started getting very heavily involved with synthesized music. He said just some of the stuff they did, he said nobody was doing it, and he doubted that anyone, at least at that point in their career, let's face it, they were very young, they were in their early 20s, could have been doing that. And it's a lot of fuel to the fire, and it's interesting. I got close to something, and it just got away.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, I have to admit, that what we're talking about with Andy and what we were talking about with Solaris, and that is, once again, the use of rock and roll or any kind of music to make a certain kind of impact, probably more clandestine than we think about. And if you remember, too, Constantine wrote that book about rock and roll back then, so what in the world could they be possibly doing, musicians at this time, this far along? And, of course, Solaris was talking about Russia's, lending themselves to such things in the 80s.
Well, that whole period ushered in the whole LSD psychedelic scene as well, which many believe was totally co-opted by...
And Andy, I don't know if I should ask you this. I never did. If you don't want to speak to it, you can. I understand. But, with your dad, I mean, was there anything he came across? I don't know that he'd ever speak to you about that kind of thing at the age you were. But can you tell us anything about some of the methodologies perhaps that the military was using with regard to this kind of technology?
Mind control?
Yeah, definitely.
No. Well, most of his life there at Carbide, he was doing chemical stuff. So, and that was where I heard about. He just made a reference to them. Somebody was sneaking stuff out in like garbage, or not garbage, in lunch pails. And who knows what that was? Was it uranium? Was it, And it had, but he said it had to do with sabotage.
Okay, but of what?
Or sneaking stuff out to use it for sabotage.
Not against Carbide, but other places.
Well, no, I don't know. Well, I mean, the implication was against Carbide. But you can easily see how, Israel had to get their uranium somehow to build their, all of their
reactors and
the bombs that they have. So that was all apparently skimmed off from here.
But, I mean, that wasn't necessarily under the table, was it? I mean, or,
Well, I think it was. I think they built the whole thing in secret, and then they just unveiled it one day, right?
Well, we went a little afield there. Just want to remind everybody you're listening to Transcriptions from a Dying Planet, the brainstorm of Adam Gorightly. It'll be a monthly show, 2 hours in length, and probably the third Tuesday of the month. Before we had Cyrus Blue Raven on, we now have Andy Colvin. No common name for those who have listened or read Adam's stuff and have listened to my show, and of course he's with us today. And I kind of derailed you to go down the track of Adorno, though I think it's worth going to, but if we can bring us back to when we last departed from the straight and narrow. And again,
okay.
And I just want to remind you, too, I'm sorry, I'm going to throw it right back to you, but we were going to mention something about JFK. I don't know if that fits right now, and I know that Adam wanted to get in there beforehand. Is this a time we might want to do that? You guys let me know.
Hey, I think we might have a caller on the line. Shall we give that a try?
Why not? That's what we're here for.
See if this works. Karen, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
There we go. Excellent.
Adam, Viz, hi.
Hey, is this a Canadian?
Yeah, I'm from Barrie, Ontario. I email you sometimes there, Viz.
Yeah, like, 2 years ago. I don't know what happened to you. I'm glad you're breathing. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I think I lost your email, but anyways.
All right. Hey,
anyway, well, the thing is, I'm just so fascinated with this whole deal. I mean, I think that I think really a lot of people have been a little bit upset about the whole fact that, we've gone through our lives like I'm a baby boomer, a little bit younger than you, Viz, but, things are not what they seem. And I think a lot of people are realizing that. And with the music and stuff, and that I was emailing a little bit earlier about the Adorno thing with the Beatles. And people don't seem to want to talk about it, but I really do think that there's been a lot going on behind the scenes that we just do not know about. And I think that we should know about. I don't know what it would do to us in the end, though, really. But, I mean, Adam has done a lot of stuff like that with the Manson stuff and stuff. And I think there's a lot of psyops going on. And we're just going along our lives, just going la-di-da-di-da, everything's cool. And it's not cool, is it, And I'm just thinking that, I don't even know how to dig anymore, really, because how do you dig? How do you dig and get people to see what you're saying? You know what I mean?
Well, Andy, what was your experience, at least from, even if you weren't involved with it yourself, although there's some interesting things, of course, that you went through with Harriet and such in West Virginia, but was there anything that anecdotally came down to you from perhaps what your father was involved in and what the family kind of knew?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think probably it was just like you. I think probably, because, I'm in my early 50s right now, and I think, I accepted everything as it was. Everybody said, Oswald killed Kennedy and blah, 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 blah. But I never really accepted that when I was a young kid, even in my teens. But I think sometime in my 30s, I looked around and I said, wait a sec, everything going on in society is not right. You know what I mean? And I think I probably saw that, I don't know, things, it's just so obvious. I mean, it seems so obvious to me that things what people are saying to you is like so transparent, it's not true. And like you say, like left and right, there's no left and right. It's all the same. They're all the same liars. And at some point, I don't know exactly when. I don't know if I could give you an exact day or time or anything, but at some point in my life, I guess probably in my early 40s, I probably said, wait a minute, no, this is not working. Nothing is changing. We can vote left. We can vote right. We can vote conservative. We can vote, Republican. Nothing changes. It's all the same. They're all puppets. And I got it,
Let me throw this to Andy, because the three of us, I mean, he's the individual that was closest to things going on. And as I had mentioned, he had some interesting experiences in grammar school, which probably a lot of us had, but we don't remember, don't really, know what the purpose was. But Andy, in your family, because of what your dad did, what about this situation of things that do go bump in the night that we're all being shielded from?
We're not really being shielded from it in all the different ways that we could be shielded from it. We're just, being shielded from it in the mental programming way, but all the other effects we're sort of experiencing, the fact that you can't take a vacation or whatever, deprivations we undergo.
You think your dad was being experimented upon?
No.
All right.
I think they wanted to get rid of him for some reason. So that's a little different. But I think, and this, there's evidence of this in some of Gray Barker's stuff and Keel stuff, that they were going around doing different things. There were men in black going around visiting homes of witnesses that had seen strange lights in the sky. And that was of interest to me because they were Orientals. And so I developed the theory that there were some reincarnations of monks occurring, and that was the reason for the MIBs, and that the monks do turn into Garudas, so that would explain Mothman.
Well, a couple of things. Did anybody, and I'll throw a question back to you up there, but did you see where, once again, there's been some admissions about testing on people that didn't know it, and the old story about Frank Olson, who was a scientist at Fort Detrick, surfaced. Is anybody familiar with that?
Oh yeah.
Well, he was killed. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Is that Frank?
Yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, as a result of the fact that in some stories I hear, and I think his son has a website out there that may explain more, but his father got dosed unknowingly with LSD by Gottlieb. And so he goes up to New York for some kind of psychiatric help. He winds up supposedly jumping from his window, but with the amount of distance that he went out from the building, they figure he had to be running either 35 miles an hour or thrown by four guys. You figure out which way it was. But here again, I mean, they were experimenting in the New York subways in '77. I mean,
yeah, and Viz, are you there, Viz?
Sure.
Yeah, and did you hear about the village in France where they did the experiment with LSD? That's what Frank Colson said in his book, and that's Hank Arabelli, or I don't know if he's got his name right, Arabelli, but he was writing about the village in France. I can't say it, but Ponce de Leon or something. Anyway, they had it was actually an LSD experiment back in 1952, I think it was, and people went insane, and they eventually played it out that it was just some kind of mold on the bread, it made people sick and stuff, but it was actually a CIA experiment that they did in that town in France to see what LSD might do, if we dropped it into a population, and people went insane, people killed themselves and never recovered from it. And it's a fact in his book,
Well,
Frank Wilson's book.
Real quickly, it was funny. The Renaissance landscaper who I grew up with in New Jersey had gone to Rutgers, and in science class, biology class, or whatever, they were they did the old the old mold on wheat bread.
Yeah, that's right. The mold on the wheat bread, right?
So it came to the telling point: who was going to eat it to find out, one, whether or not it was LSD, or two, were going to die from the poisoning. So they forgot about it in another experiment down the tubes. But we were talking with Solaris, and I don't want to say too much about this, but do I remember this correctly? Is Russia a Canadian group?
Yes,
what's that?
Sorry? Yes,
Russia Canadian?
Yes.
All right. Now, here's another thing, and I don't know if you're aware of it, seeing that you're a Canadian national, but Eleanor in Toronto, who was a victim of this harassment, by the way, and experimentation, was a Canadian resident. And I'm just wondering, too, given the work of Kevin and Annette and others, just how much the Canadian government allowed its military and other branches to do on people up there. It seems that you guys are no second place when it comes to Saturnine and subterfuge and
in terms of that, I mean, Canadians, I was watching a show last night, and Canadians, and they were saying about the Dutch, I think it was, the Dutch are like, tread lightly on the Dutch and stuff. Well, it's the same thing with the Canadians. Canadians are politically correct, and everything is politically correct, and we're trying to do the right thing, but we're all politically correct, and it's just all muddled up. I mean, you can't even... I mean, in my view, what I'm looking at things right now, I mean, everything is so, I mean, this is right, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is right. I mean, we're so politically correct, and yet there are other things that you have to, I don't know. I mean, but certainly in that case, yes, we're certainly backing off, and we're not a fighting nation anyways, so, and the whole thing is a mess anyways, so what are we even doing?
Well, you kicked our ass in hockey, so that's good enough.
Yeah.
All right, listen, thank you for the call. We got to get back. We want to hit on a couple other things. So it's good to hear from you again, and you can email me at vyzygoth@hotmail.com. All right, Andy, we didn't get back to the situation with JFK. For some reason, that keeps overreaching our ability to grasp here. So can we go to that now? Would that be okay? I'll take that as a yes.
Well, there's a quote. It's funny, right? When you said that, I saw a quote that I wrote down. I wrote down like little quotes. Killing and speeches are practically inseparable.
Killing and speeches.
Yes. That's Paladin from the show Have Gun Will Travel.
Holy mackerel, where'd you come up with that?
By the way, did you see the show with Little Joe on it from the Bonanza? There was a Garuda in it, and it was an episode where he falls in love with a shape-shifting gypsy woman who can turn into like a werewolf and so forth.
This was from Bonanza? They did this?
He actually falls in love with her and asks Ben to give him land on the Ponderosa to get married.
Okay, so now since none of the boys actually did get hitched, or briefly.
It's a paranormal Garuda episode of Bonanza.
What happened to her?
They also had one with the Wild Man of Washoe. Washoe, there's that name, Washita, Moorish, Indian, Washington, that whole name, which I guess was in Lake Tahoe, a Bigfoot-like creature. And they get this, they actually, in the show, they have a crazy cryptozoologist guy. He claims that they have a frozen body of the Wild Man of Washoe in a block of ice.
Are you watching Bonanza in an alternate dimension or something? I don't remember these episodes.
No. Oh, this is an episode where Mark Twain's in town. He's in Virginia City, and I guess this is actually true. He really did write for that paper.
Mm-hmm.
So
right, yeah.
He came up with a Bigfoot story, Mark Twain, and so here we have the Bigfoot body, as you remember. You were there, right, at the
I went to the press conference.
Adam, that was a rerun of Bonanza.
Wow.
Amazing.
Bonanza wrote the future.
These guys always go back and grab stuff from books and shows.
Well, no, wait a second. Where did you see that? Was that on Hulu or something?
What?
Did you actually see that old episode?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's an Encore Western channel, which I watch a lot now. I like old Westerns. So. All
right. Well, you would expect this, though. I think it was it Twilight Zone? Well, it was a show produced in the 50s. But, of course, because they were dealing with witches, and backcountry people, it didn't seem, obviously, as radical as what you would find, that kind of stuff on Bonanza. But there was a shapeshifter in there too. I don't know if you remember that a woman wanted to be married to this guy, and she made some kind of pact and wound up being a leopard or something like that. This was in West Virginia, by the way.
But there was an episode of Have Gun Will Travel where Paladin is bewitched by a witch, and there's a bear, which is like a Bigfoot. It turns out to be a bear, but they do some mind control on him in a cave using flashing, turning the lights on and off, throwing some magic dust, and making him think that that there's a shape-shifting bear man, like a man who can shift between bear and man in the cave with him, and it's all a shadow play. And it turns out to be like a Scooby-Doo episode where they're just trying to hide out there and not have people come around. So they concoct this witchy Bigfoot-like situation. And, and this is in 1957. So, by the time the Patterson film came around, that's 10 years later, they had plenty of time to, work on the storyline.
Actually, going back to what started this whole thing with Paladin, the nature of that comment, speeches and killing are the same. Do you remember what the context of that was? I mean, was it a politician doing the yada-yada?
Yeah, some political situation in Europe, I think. I think he was referencing Europe even. Because he goes to Europe in the storyline. He's had tea with the Queen, apparently, or something in the show. Well, there's different directions we can go. I don't know how much time we have.
I just want to talk about JFK.
Oh, okay. Well, is there a time? There's a lot of these little connections between JFK and this Mothman stuff, and have you found out anything, Adam, in the Thornley material that points in the direction of Ohio with Thornley?
No.
No?
Not off the top of my head. What did maybe that'd be something to talk about? What you came across in regards to Kerry Thornley and the Kennedy assassination?
Well, I just have the theory that he had to have known what was going on, and maybe they used his storyline from his book that was printed. It came out. I think it came out before the assassination, didn't it? The first one.
His first book was Oswald, called Oswald, appropriately enough, and that came out. Well, there's different books here.
Right. Yeah. The very first one, which wasn't about Oswald, was written up the day that Oswald was shot. Thornley's book was written on the front page of the Louisiana papers, mentioned.
Yeah, he was working on a book called The Idle Warriors when he was in the Marines. He'd met Oswald in the Marines and started this book about a disenchanted Marines during the post-war period, and he based the main character on himself and Oswald and a bunch of other Marines he had known. Then when Oswald defected, he turned the book, the protagonist, based it entirely on Oswald. So he was writing that book about Oswald prior to the Kennedy assassination, which people found curious. That's the book you're talking about, I think, The Idle Warriors, which really didn't get published until 1991.
By the way, I jumped up to get that manuscript you sent me.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to, we were talking about the Ohio connection. I want to ask Andy why that. I'm just thumbing through to see if there's anything there. But what was the Ohio deal with Thornley?
I don't know. I don't know that there is. Other than he made a quote once that about West Virginia UFOs. He explained them as I think coming out from under the ground or something. Anyway, it just was odd that he even made a comment about it. There's these other little connections with, Alvis Maddox is a player in JFK who Keel was being warned about, more or less. that he would end up like Maddox.
Yeah, that Maddox name comes up quite a bit. That was Charles Manson's original surname was Maddox. His father's name was Maddox, and he also mentioned Holly Maddox, who was murdered by Ira Einhorn.
Let me.
Sorry,
go ahead.
There's some pretty solid connections, like with the TNT area that's associated with Mothman, like the bunkers that David Ferry was using in Louisiana, involved in the JFK assassination. Those and the CIA was using these bunkers owned by Schlumberger in Louisiana. They got run out of there, and my theory is that they came up to the TNT area, and Schlumberger may not. They probably owned some of the bunkers there, but maybe under a different name of a different company or something. Because all the names of there's several owners of those bunkers.
By the way, I believe this research came from Phelps. I believe it did. I'm not sure, so I mean that with good intentions. But this connection, at least with Ohio and the JFK assassination, did any of you hear that supposedly Lee Iacocca drove that vehicle away and brought it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? The limousine that Kennedy was shot in.
Yeah.
You did hear that?
Well, I think you mentioned it once. I don't know.
All right. No, I just find it interesting because, once again, who was Lee Iacocca, and all of a sudden, bang, it took some time, but, he got his paybacks. But that was the thing, and that is that when, what's-his-face, Arlen Specter was recreating the magic bullet path and all that, the vehicle they used, and you guys may know that, was not the vehicle, same type vehicle that Kennedy was in. I think it was a Lincoln Continental. I'm not sure, but in other words, the spatiality in the car, with the bodies, in reference to the others, wasn't the same. So they never did use the original vehicle, and supposedly he got driven away with a replaced windshield also. So I don't know. It's that Wright Air Force Base is mentioned, I think, is rich because that's got to be the Area 52 east of the Mississippi. What do you guys think?
Well, the thing about the TNT area is that they were doing atomic production there of some kind. And then as they started to wind it down around the time of Mothman, that was the time of the carbide strike. Industry was suffering. So they closed it down, and they had to have super high security. And they already had super high security. You had to drive to the plant in a blacked-out bus. No one was allowed to drive in anywhere near it. And so I think as they closed it down, they had a real issue with not wanting stuff disappearing, and that was what the Men in Black were, some of them, because they were Greek, and I think that was some kind of connection with Howard Hughes or something, the Gemstone file, perhaps Operation Chaos. They bring in, when you have super high security needs like that, sometimes the intel guys use foreign people because they can get around the laws on spying, and that's what I'm assuming happened with those Greeks that were there. But I think the Oriental Men in Black were just a different set of players who were interested in something else.
Just about out of time. We're talking with Andy Colvin. The website's andycolvin.com, and you can hear him regularly on my show, Think or Be Eaten. And any parting comments before we wrap it up?
Well, yeah, just that Mothman is sort of he's very similar to the crypto-terrestrial idea that these beings manifest from a shadow being first, and then morph up into a solid being, and that's what I've been saying, all along, and I think it's just starting to sort of catch on, and it's another idea I had about the Mothman sort of being in other places other than West Virginia. It took a long time for that idea to catch on, but that's sort of been happening in the last couple of shows they've had, which is good and bad, But you just got to work with the situation and try to keep the demonology down, demonology factor, because it really throws some static in the signal and makes it hard to understand what this is. I mentioned to you there was an Egyptian god named Atum, which is similar to Adam, like Adam and Eve, the Atom, lots of names that we've come across in the story, Etam, Atom, the name of the nine channeler, and you add to that qua, spirit, and you have quantum. So you have earth with spirit in it equals quantum. And but it's all in that old Moorish symbolism with some of their gods. Atum creates himself from a mound, and I think that's essentially how we were created. And I think what you see with all these creatures is you see misfirings of creatures wanting to become real. And as soon as we observe them, we collapse their wave, and they disappear. If enough people see it, it stops appearing.
All right, we got to run on that.
Yeah.
Also, I want to.
It's an important idea, though, I think.
Well, and I want to bring that up also either when you come back here again or when we do another show. But and I'll write you an email about that. It's been on my mind. So, Andy, thanks a lot for being with us. We appreciate it. Karen, good to hear from you up there in the Great White North. And Adam, you want to close us out?
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. Be talking to you, Andy. I'd like to have you back on talking about Indrid Cold at some point. And Viz, it was real.
It always is.
See you guys.
At any rate, we're going to pick up where we left off. He had last spoken with regard to Indrid Cold, and I think you're just going to make a comment about that, and we're going to pick up with what took place in the late winter, early spring months until now. And so take it away, Andrew.
Yeah, one more thing about Indrid was that I found an article written in 1978 about the Indrid Cold stuff in Official UFO magazine, written by Harold Salkin, and there's some oddities to the article. It definitely describes what sounds like a sort of a hypnotic thing was going on with Derenberger and Indrid, that Indrid was things were moving around. Indrid was using phraseology that sounds like that of a hypnotist. The craft was moving around strangely. At one point, Derenberger says it was up too high for anyone to see who was driving by. But then in the next breath, he's saying it was 6 inches off of the roadway. And there's a picture of a crashed VW bug that has been hit by a truck in the article. And the caption is, "Mere coincidence? The very night of Derenberger's encounter, this collision occurred only 2 miles west of the meeting place. Driver of the truck said he was distracted by a silvery object in the sky."
They're called planes.
What?
They're called planes. Airplanes.
Well, yeah, I made the joke at the Forteans West site that maybe, Cold was known to drive a Volkswagen, and in the picture, the license plate is blacked out. And this looks like a serious accident, too.
Yeah, it does. I saw that on that website. And what is your association with the Forteans at this point?
I am the Washington State Bureau Director of the League of Western Fortean Intermediatists, which is, I don't know if Forteans West is another, umbrella organization or not, but Forteans West is a little easier to say.
All right, do you want me? Well, never mind. I know you have some stuff up there. I'll put the link up to that as well.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
That's pretty much where I'm blogging right now.
Okay. Yeah, I did see that.
Well, but, these people running into cars is not unknown in this story. Harriet's dad was run off the road. Or I think actually the guy just rammed him. I mean, just head on, like that's one of the techniques of spies is they know how to have car wrecks and injure people. So anyway, I was joking that Indrid had to use his flying saucer since his Volkswagen had been hit by the truck. But it makes you wonder, this place 2 miles west, it could have been near where Walter Bosley lived. Bosley's a guy with a military intelligence, from a military intelligence family who's sort of been poking around in the Mothman story. He's saying that they lived, a mile or so away from the site where all this took place. And his dad was, Bosley's dad was in, I think it was naval intelligence at the time. And so, and then they left right after the Mothman, the Silver Bridge collapse. And Bosley's, in the field today, making different claims, none of which really I can remember right now. But it's kind of odd. And this accident looks like it may have been right where he was living. Anyway, there's a picture of a guy in this article that looks very similar to the Indrid Cold drawings. There's a couple of drawings out there that people who had seen him made, and they're saying that this picture was shot in '78. So it makes you wonder if Indrid Cold was still there, and that's what I've heard, is that he was there for several years afterward. And I'm gonna post this to the blog today, so people can see this face. It's a very interesting. It's a very distinct face, and it's not. It's strange how they don't name who these people are in the article. It's almost like they're wanting to print his picture without saying that it's him, thus getting themselves into hot water. But we may have an image here of Indrid Cold, I guess is the point of this. Back to the calendar. One of the things I mentioned in March, or forgot to mention in March, was these man-bat sightings that they had in Mexico. Those started in early March, and they kept on going, but they weren't brought to the media's attention until the second week of April, which is where we left off in our calendar. Mm-hmm. So in April, second week of April, suddenly they start talking about this Mexican man-bat. People start claiming that it is that the man-bat has been conjured up somehow via some occult activity, and that the man-bat is killing animals, because they often will find dead animals at the same time some of these creatures are seen. But it may not be, that's a specious line of reasoning, because it could be that the creatures are appearing in order to counteract somehow the killing of the animals. Because one of the ways that you would conjure up anything would be to kill animals in a ritualistic way, like some of these occult groups are said to do. And it could be that, while that may conjure up an animal, animal A may not be a man-bat. Animal B may be the man-bat. The man-bat may be a response to evil, what you could label evil, quote, activity. But the articles always play up the fear side of the equation, even though if you look closely at the testimony of the people that saw the man-bat, in this case, they weren't afraid, and they actually felt like it was some sort of benevolent being. But the newspapers, try to make it into something scary and negative.
That's why we love them.
Yeah. So I guess we sort of left off second week of April there.
Well, the Ides of April are always interesting.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, what happened in the Ides of April is they started all this pirate stuff.
Yeah.
The pirate stuff, and this dovetailed exactly with a book that a lady wrote about the oil industry and how they had been focusing in the last few years on raising prices using the excuses that revolve around domestic distribution of oil within the borders of the United States. So they were, tinkering with all that to keep the prices up. And then she was saying that they were shifting now to the international distribution area to keep the prices up. Because obviously, people can't afford it, aren't going to be buying enough here to keep the price up, or whatever, assuming that has anything to do with the price. But, so you immediately started seeing these incidents which, quote, threatened, shipping.
You know what bothered me about that, and perhaps you don't, but I'll tell you anyway. After a while, if this is going to be an entrenched problem, what I'm thinking about is, regardless where the United States or whatever nation has a battle carrier group out there somewhere, you have satellites. I mean, you don't have to be stationed in in all this. They kept saying, well, the area is so massive, how are you going to know? Well, look, they're coming out of a certain place. That's where they're coming out of, Somalia, right? And the other thing is, if you got a bird that's on them, if you see something happening, why not send out a couple of fighters? Well,
why not just shoot them with a drone missile, which is what they're doing in Pakistan all the time now.
Or outfit the ships. Yeah, okay, duh. So, it's like, why is this such an insoluble problem? Because I understand the way they break it down to us, again, the news media giving us anything but the truth. Why, it's such a massive... We don't need surface vessels trying to catch them. All you got to do is take a look at them from an eye in the sky, send out a couple of F-16s or whatever, and bang, you're dead. Out. Goodbye. That'll do it. So, I don't know. But anyway, and then it disappears. It's like we used to kid around back in 2000 that the only good thing that came out of 9/11 was it apparently stopped SUV rollovers and Goodyear tire problems. And I'm saying it sarcastically, Andy, but it was like we heard nothing except, if you can think back then, you remember it was a big thing about SUV rollovers, and Ford was blaming Goodyear and Goodyear's tires, and
right.
And then somehow after 9/11 it all stopped. And the other thing that stopped too, shark attacks in Florida. Suddenly no more in the news. Now, yes, my tongue is firmly planted in my... This is the truth, though. I mean, that's exactly what happened. But my tongue is planted into my cheek saying, okay, so now, as we speak, are there no more Somali pilots skipping around the Indian Ocean?
Yeah. Well, or maybe they were shot down. They could shoot these pirates with some kind of infrasonic sound weapon. This morning I randomly did my random opening of a book, and it was a Secret and Suppressed 2 book, which there's an article in there by Joseph Farrell, and he's sort of keying off of an article that was in the Secret and Suppressed 1 book, having to do with Otto Skorzeny and Nazi International. And Farrell actually quotes, he quotes some material in there about how Nazi Germany had built a sound weapon. It looked a lot like Wilhelm Reich's, cloud-busting machine. But this was something that was developed long ago and simply could be pointed at any, that was a sound weapon, but they also could just point an electromagnetic weapon, such as Marconi's weapon, that would just shut down the engine of any vehicle, so that you could point that at a plane or a boat and just make it die right there. Speaking of this total tangent here, but Marconi's was covered in that RAI special about Mothman, 911 Mothman, Marconi, and Marilyn Monroe. Marconi, according to Al Bielek, who I don't, believe, but I don't believe at least the parts that he wants you to believe, I don't believe, which is that he was a time traveler. But he was talking about Marconi's company being a spy cover company, that there were spies in the company. And interestingly, Bielek, in his very first talk about all of his whole story, was this back in when was that? I think it was in the late 80s. Tim Beckley was the guy that introduced Bielek sort of to the world and had him speak at a conference. And Bielek gets up and says, "Oh, this is my first talk ever on this subject. I don't know what I'm going to say, blah, blah, blah." But then he gives this totally polished talk about, Montauk and all the mind control and time travel and all that, and started this huge ball rolling that's continuing to roll today, that all this time travel stuff is going on, which is really the least probable, the hardest thing to believe about the whole Montauk story. So they take the least believable thing and sort of amp it up. Anyway, back to April. So in that third week of April, a lot of stuff was going well. In the second week, by the way, they had supposedly our electrical grid was being hacked by someone on the 8th, April 8th. And then Iran charged a journalist with spying. The Somali pilots, struck that day. There was a shooting at a Korean retreat center in California the day before. Just a bunch of different things that are all provocative in their own right, and they just sort of suddenly all happened together. Riots began in Thailand on the 13th. On the 14th, some more Somali ships, or pirates hijacked some more ships. There was a guy named John Demjanjuk who...
Who got he had been extradited, wasn't he, to Germany?
Yeah, and he was taken from Seven Hills, Ohio. He was living in Ohio, so there's an example of a Nazi living in Ohio who was, at least important enough that they wanted to take him back. So some of the North Korea stuff was starting up then. They just, as soon as Obama was installed and, starting to get things rolling, they had to get the threats up, the threats so that Obama, because he, was campaigning less as a hawk and more as a reformer, they had to amp up these threats so that he could then, plausibly go after, whoever. And it's really ridiculous what they're doing right now. They're, literally just using drone weapons to bomb Pakistan and Afghanistan. And one wonders, what the overall plan is over there. Is it just the protection of the drug trade?
It's target
Is
practice.
it making space for the new Israel?
Nah. It's target practice. I'm telling you, they're trying everything out for the next one.
Yeah. On the 15th, Air America, some of the documents about the Air America program are released, and this is, I've read different accounts of what all was going on with Air America, but the one that always sort of sticks in my mind is that Pepsi was running a factory over there in Asia that was actually churning out heroin, and then they were shipping the heroin back, in the bodies of dead, soldiers.
Yeah, that's right. In Vietnam, they were stuffing the drugs in their body cavities. Isn't that great? Listen, I had somebody tell me after hearing us talk about this. We did this on the show years ago. I don't know why this person did that, because you got to be careful when you say this stuff, but the individual was in line at some eatery or something like that. I guess it was a takeout. I don't remember. And struck up a conversation with a guy that apparently was a Vietnam vet and just tossed this out, which I would not have done. And the guy said, yeah, you're right, absolutely. I didn't think anybody knew that, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, so there you go.
Yeah. On the 14th, there was a story about a mysterious light coming in from a black hole. So you often have these paranormal-ish kind of stories tossed in, you know, and you know, when people hear that, they see a vision of a big black hole and a mysterious light, and then it just, who knows if that's some sort of hypnotic programming on a mass scale or what, but it's strange how there's always these mystery stories about what's happening in outer space.
By the way, I have to tell you, because you reminded me, and I took a look, referring back to our first show, the first part, when I told you about the lights in South America?
Yeah.
All right. What it is it is the island of Colares, Colares, off the north, I believe, eastern coast of Brazil, that began to experience UFO lights. And it began in August 1977, and I'm hoping Elvis's death didn't have anything to do with it.
Yes.
But at any rate, you can read about this on UFOcasebook.com, and then do a /Colares 1977.html, and you will get there. So anyway, Andy, I did find it, and that's what it was about. It was a pretty decent documentary too. So anyway, I know you just reminded me. It's out. It's done. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to roll through April here in one swoop, and then we can talk about anything. Is that all right?
Well, what happened to May and June?
No. I just want to get through April.
But you have May and June, right?
Yeah, they weren't as active, so those won't take long.
But all right, yes. But I mean, I don't mind spending a little time on April only because it has been an active month. But this year, as far as brushes with groups in the government, it was not the case. I think everybody's expecting things to happen in the Ides of April, and I mean that, from the 15th to the 19th, because of Hitler's birthday and the Murrah building situation and blah, blah, blah. We all know about that. And of course, it's tax day and that kind of crap. But it doesn't seem to happen because everybody's expecting things to happen during the Ides, and I think it more or less is slowing down. So, by the way, when did that may have been later too? Do you have anything about the fact that, I don't know, somebody in the government was popping off about militant white supremacist groups or patriots or something like that being terrorists and all this crap?
Yeah, they definitely started that up again, and that usually happens when a Democrat's in office.
Okay. Now, do you know when that happened with regard to April, May, and June? Did that happen in April also, or did it happen in May? Or do you not have that down on the timeline?
Yeah, I didn't really do that. It sort of started early on. When Obama, got going. I can't remember, but yeah, I would say March probably.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. April.
Yeah, April 15th, there was a Cleopatra tomb story. So they were searching her tomb, or had found it. So that's a Masonic, tinge story. We're still messing around in Thailand by the end of the week on the 17th. An assassination attempt in Thailand. There's an earthquake in Afghanistan. There's several earthquakes that month. The U.S. and Japan give $1 billion to Pakistan. So it's kind of interesting. It's like we're giving them $1 billion and then we're bombing parts of their country.
Well, how are they going to get built up if we don't help them? It's the Marshall Plan over and over and over.
There was a Long Beach hospital shooting on the 17th. And also they found skinned coyotes in the Columbus area, Columbus, Ohio. That article came out that day. So one wonders, if these are people that are trying to become skinwalkers by, skinning the coyotes and then wearing the skins.
Where in Ohio? Near Columbus?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you might you expect this maybe out in the Four Corners area, but why in Ohio? Well, because there's a lot of occultists there. And there's also a lot of military occultists, one would imagine.
Well, I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, in that area, maybe in the Appalachians, as it is in Vermont, in their part of the Appalachian chain, I mean, we knew of coy dogs, not coyotes. But, I mean, are these people who might have brought them in from somewhere else? I mean, are true coyotes endemic to that area?
I don't know if they're true coyotes, but yeah, there's coyotes.
All right.
There, yeah. There were a few things that weekend, various shootings and things happening here in the States. And then at the beginning of the anniversary of Columbine, of course, was the 10th anniversary was on the 19th. And then that following week, you saw a lot of things. You immediately saw Ahmadinejad making anti-Israeli comments at the UN on the 20th. It's supposed to be Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so he immediately stirs things up. We found out on the 20th that the U.S. had waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed 183 times in order to extract, he ended up
confessing to anything.
He was mastermind.
He probably has gills now. What a garbage.
So that they could get, false
just tell me
information linking Saddam Hussein to 911.
Amelia Earhart, Marilyn Monroe, and
a Jamaican airliner was hijacked on the 20th, which probably, kind of makes you think of the Nazi International, because they're the guys that supposedly set these hijackings up. Obama shook Chavez's hand, and Newt Gingrich got all upset about that on the 20th. We found out that there's drugs. I guess it was another story, or was it the first story, about the drugs in our water? How many prescription drugs have made their way into our water?
What a supply, I know.
So they're really hitting us with a bunch of stuff on the 20th. The 21st, it's the same. It just keeps on going. Well, the 21st, we found out that the banks were going to stop. It weren't lending money. The money that they had gotten from the bailout just wasn't finding its way into anyone's mortgages. Obama opened his torture probe that day. They found an Earth-like planet right outside of our solar system on the 21st. So that's another planet that's been discovered. Is that like number 18 or something? The Craigslist killer came into the news. On the 22nd, we had the Freddie Mac CFO executive dude suicide. Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know about you, but I thought that they got rid of that real quick.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, no conspiracy. He's dead. I don't know. I just thought that they treated that like, okay, he's gone, and now the sports.
Yeah. Just as Obama's opening his torture probe the day before, then we suddenly hear that the Taliban is tightening their grip over Afghanistan. So they're building up to these incursions. We just had a surge this week in Afghanistan. U.S. surge. We also started hearing, the SERE, S-E-R-E, Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape program of the navies, where they waterboard their own people, came online. So everybody's arguing about waterboarding. But strangely, so you've got some build-up going here where some issues are being talked about. Like we had Jesse Ventura on The View, going after, arguing, strongly that waterboarding should not be something that we should be doing because it's going to come back to haunt us. And by the way, waterboarding goes back all the way back to the colonial days. I saw a drawing from a cartoon from the turn of the century
Let me
like
guess.
Early 1900s, where they were waterboarding an Indian.
And who was doing that? The Brits or us?
Well, it was like a Union soldier waterboarding an Indian, and some joke was made about it. And they claim this started back with the Japanese, but it must go back into antiquity.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly, on the 23rd, they start the whole Susan Boyle thing, the singer from Britain. So to give you a bunch of, there's been some things revealed, that they waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed 183 times. That sort of discussion is going on, and suddenly you have this singer in Britain who's really, frumpy, but yet she can sing great, and so she stayed in the media, she stayed in the news for a long time and drowned out a lot of other stories.
She reminds me of Newt Gingrich with a perm.
She does look like him.
He does, I know. And another one of his illegitimate children, no doubt. Anyway.
Well, they didn't stop this. They didn't stop their stuff, because on the 24th you got more things. You got these plane provocations. You got a plane that mysteriously appears in Washington D.C. airspace, and then there was another one the following Monday in New York.
Oh, you mean
yeah.
Bringing Air Force One or a Air Force One fleet craft.
Yeah.
I mean, what are they thinking about? Honest to goodness,
I think it's clearly to allude to terrorism.
To ramp it up.
Yeah.
Well, you know how I knew it was bogus?
How?
Because they actually had F-16s guiding it. Because of 9/11, there wasn't anything around. Well, you know what I mean? What a joke. Of course it isn't a terror event. You got F-16s up there with them, the way it should be, except for that day in September.
Yeah. On the 24th, you've got Saberi, the U.S. journalist who's probably a spy, on a hunger strike in an Iranian prison. You've got GM threatening shutdowns unless they get $2 more billion in bailout money. You've got an earthquake in the Gallipolis area, believe it or not, Point Pleasant. There was an earthquake on the 24th on the Ohio-West Virginia border, right near Point Pleasant.
How do the natives pronounce that town's name?
Gallipolis.
Okay, I always thought it was Gallipolis, but okay. One of my favorite towns. That's off my must-see list, along with Mason, West Virginia, which I told you about.
Yeah. On the 25th, guess what? We have our swine flu outbreak.
Swine boo.
Swine flu began. On the 26th, an earthquake in Mexico City. On the 27th, a fighter jet circles the Empire State Building. Or I don't know if that's just the Air Force One thing or not. Is that something else?
Oh, I don't know.
GM announces 21,000 jobs are being cut. On the 28th, a study finds that skinny people are scared by sounds more easily. So does that mean that they're going... I mean, what are they going to do with that information? Try to get people to lose weight so that we can be terrorized more easily?
Or have them go ahead and get heavier so they won't have to worry about that crap anymore.
An ice shelf broke off on the 28th.
Who?
A huge ice shelf. And those stories get a lot of mileage, making people afraid of global warming, which, I just recently heard this theory that global warming is caused by the contrails, that the chemtrails are being put up to increase heat by trapping heat with whatever molecules they're spreading. It seems like it would be hard to do.
Yes, I think
over such a large area. But you never know, because the ionosphere works in such a way that particles tend to drift together into fine layers.
Well,
and they find their place in this whole progression of layers, and it could be that a very thin layer of something could be could be put up there, I guess,
well,
theoretically.
Remember something now. This was actually talked about by the Air Force, and this is back in around 2001 or 2, maybe a little even earlier. It might have been there before I came upon it, where they willingly admitted that they were making basically a screen, if you would. They metallicized space or a certain level of the atmosphere to bounce RF off them, radio wave transmission. All right, it's like, okay, you know, and all this other stuff. The other thing was, well, we can modify wet weather and make it rain on the enemy, blah blah blah. So this was, and then all of a sudden all that stuff went away, and nobody wanted to talk about it at all. Trudeau was saying once that when he was looking, I guess, on global satellites or whatever, he said, you know, it's not across the whole world. It seems to be in certain areas that you would necessarily equate with the good guys, you know, in the global battle between good guys and bad guys, which would be the northern hemisphere, or North America rather, in the western hemisphere, and also Western Europe. Now, I don't know. I mean, does this stuff float? I mean, I don't know how you can keep it pinned on top of a certain particular geographical area unless you have to do, you know, a 360. I don't know. I don't think that it's out there to make us sick. I think that our getting sick off that is a collateral damage to the military. So, yeah, you know, obviously it's being done for a reason. They don't want to talk about it at all anymore. Trudeau thought that it might be possibly a shield to prevent an EMP or whatever from knocking out the grid, which makes a certain amount of sense. I don't know how much, you know, I don't know how they behave, the contrail masses. If it's, you know, I don't know. But if it were a shield for an upcoming conflict, that kind of does make sense. And then the fact that people shouldn't be breathing titanium and barium and such is not a good thing, but I don't think it's for our extermination. You know, whoever craps because of it, that's the way it goes according to the military. But I think it's more military than anything else. I mean, I don't know. Doesn't that strike you as a military thing?
Yeah. There could be some sort of mapping capabilities to it too, depending on how the particles are dispersed. You could perhaps even leave tracers on. If it's being used to bounce signals, there might be a way to even identify where signals came from, based on some sort of signature that's applied at the place where it's bounced off of the ionosphere. Sort of similar to how they put when you buy explosives, they put these little tags in there. You can only see them under a microscope, but there's these little identifiers that they put in the explosives, so that if you blow something up, they're called taggets, I think. And
so they can trace back where the purchase was?
Yeah, there was a West Virginia case where a guy had bought some dynamite in West Virginia and then killed his nephew, and then they were able to find out where the stuff was purchased, and then they looked at the log of the guy who had sold it and saw the name of one of their suspects in there. And interestingly, that was a program that was started sometime, I can't remember if it was the 80s or 90s, but there was a program in place to have this mandatory tagging going on with all explosives. And lo and behold, it was withdrawn. And I saw, you know, an episode of this on Forensic Files, and the police guys are saying, you know, it's really weird that they took that away, because that could have allowed us to solve so many different bombing cases if we had this tag in there.
Bingo.
Yeah, bingo. They took them out in order to facilitate terrorism.
Sure. Well, who do you think's perpetrating terrorism on us except our own? So, you know, there's a lot of law enforcement has no idea this is going on, but there's a whole bunch of black bag people out there that operate on another whole level. So, it doesn't surprise me. And by the way, wasn't that like those rocket kids back in the 50s from West Virginia?
Mm-hmm.
And didn't they go on to NASA, some of them?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear that locally, like when you were growing up, that took place in West Virginia? Or is that something you had to like watch a movie about to find out about?
No, it was known.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
but it just lends to the legend of West Virginia.
Yeah.
I wonder what state holds the record for most of its population being on Jerry Springer. It's got to be close between Kentucky and West Virginia.
I don't know.
I know. Well, curious minds want to know. All right, moving on.
I know that Kentucky was considered by the Indians to be the place where some large white people were living, who were thought to be from Europe by the Indians, thought to be from across the ocean, and I'm trying to remember the name of the chief. There's a quote from one of the chiefs who said, we do not go into Kentucky, because I think Lord Dunmore, one of the Brits, was trying to negotiate, how do we buy Kentucky from the Indians? And the Indians were like, well,
why don't you just take it?
Yeah, because the souls of these dead Europeans are there everywhere, and we only go in there to hunt, and we always ask permission from the spirits there.
Isn't that where Lincoln came from? Was he not born in Kentucky?
Yes.
And what was he? And was he inordinately tall at that time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was tall. Yes.
And then some people have him as being part black. Some people have him being Jewish. I don't know, whatever. But the guy was big and he came from Kentucky.
Well, the guy who turned the entire nation onto LSD, Owsley, was from Kentucky. He was from an old Kentucky family. I think his grandfather had been governor.
Oh, good old Owsley. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was friends with Manson, supposedly.
Yeah, and then he was also a principal in the entourage around the Grateful Dead. Do I have that right? I believe I do.
I think so.
Yeah.
Finishing up April, though, Chrysler started going bankrupt on the 30th. On the 1st of May, we had NATO had another Somali hijacking. Dynamite was seized. So it started to seem like they were going to build it up into more of a terrorism thing. Because it was kind of ridiculous. At first, it's just guys in one little boat. And never did. So I think they started to introduce the dynamite thing to make it seem more plausible. But then the whole thing just sort of disappeared. On the 2nd of May, there was a story about birds being able to dance. I like bird stories because of the symbolisms.
Oh, yeah, I saw they had a bunch of cockatiels rocking out, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
On the 5th of May, the U.S. bombed Afghanistan, so we really started going in there. And then we had a supposed Taliban offensive in Pakistan, which was probably CIA up to something there. Bank of America starts going bankrupt on the 6th. On the 7th, the Barker Ranch where Manson lived burned down in California out there in the desert. And I recently heard that there's been a program put on by the Navy for quite a while where they go in. They've been going into this because that's right next to that base, the one that Harriet's aunt was head of for a while, China Lake. Right next to China Lake, the Navy's been going in and spraying some chemical on everywhere, and then setting the landscape on fire to clear out brush. And was there some other reason for that?
Yeah, and incriminating evidence.
And incriminating evidence. I forget what the chemical is called, but that's what Adam Gorightly heard from one of the locals. And so one would imagine that was caused by that. And then the next day you have these big wildfires in Santa Barbara again. Like every year there's wildfires in Santa Barbara, and they always seem to come around. The timing is a little suspicious. It says here the Santa Ana winds come in the fall, so these
so it would not fall
fires would not be caused by that. On May 10th, we had the SLA's James Kilgore released from prison. A lot of these SLA people, like Sarah Jane Moore and so forth, have been getting released.
Well, Moore was in SLA though, was she?
Well, she was helping them.
Oh no, wait a minute. So we got Moore being part of. Wasn't she actually on the periphery or part of the Manson posse?
No, well, she knew Squeaky,
And Squeaky's the first failed assassin of Gerald Ford. Moore's the second failed assassin of Gerald Ford.
Yeah, and Squeaky took pot shots 17 days before Moore, so that's kind of a Masonic number that I noted. And I noted that when Moore recently was on Matt Lauer,
I saw that. Go ahead.
They flashed her picture from when she was arrested, and the numbers under her name were 07-17-77 or 7-17-77. I can't remember exactly.
You know, she was ugly back then too.
Yeah, but the numbers, you know, are Masonically tinged simply in her police picture.
So, in other words, she may have come about this from the Symbionese Liberation Army aspect.
Yeah, well, she was being asked to inform on them by the FBI. So she was, you know, hanging out with them. And this is all very mysterious. We know very little about what she was doing. And I just purchased that book about her, written by Jerry Spieler, which finally did come out. And so I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm going to read it and see if we can find out anything more about what she was really up to. One of the things she was up to was being the bookkeeper for People in Need, which was Randolph Hearst's program to distribute the food so that he could get his daughter back. So this puts Sarah Jane in an important position. Why? Because Jim Jones's church was helping with people in need. And Jim Jones they were, I think, making the food, some of the food, for people in need. And then they were double billing it. They were taking the food. Let me see, how does this work? Okay, they were handing the food off of a truck. So Jonestown people make the food. They give it to Sarah Jane. She tallies it up. It goes off of the truck to somebody in the street, but that somebody in the street is really an agent for Jonestown or the church. And then they come back and hand the same plate of food back to Sarah Jane and her people a few minutes later, saying that it's coming in from headquarters. And I can't remember the source for this. It may have been John Judge, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
But that was the story. So she probably knew what was going on there, one would imagine.
Let me ask you this. Now, did you watch the interview between her and Matt Lauer?
I did.
Would you just tell me what you thought about her demeanor and what she said, what her overall presence during that interview? Would you typify that?
She a couple of times said that she didn't know why she was there, how she got there, that she was unduly influenced, you know. I mean, I think she's trying to tell us that she was...
A tool?
A tool, yeah.
Yeah. What did you think about when Maddie Honey was pressing her about being released, even though she was the alleged assassin of a president? You remember that at all, Andy? I do, but I mean, did that strike you?
Yeah, what did you think? I don't remember really.
I thought she was very taciturn during the whole interview. I would say whether this happened since her incarceration or whatever, this woman possesses a decent intellect. And now a certain presence also, being on the Today Show after being released from the joint. And he kept pressing, he's going, look, I did the time proscribed within the parameters of the judicial system. I did my time. I'm done. Well, don't you think? I did my time. I'm done. If you get a problem with the penalty, go take it up with them. I don't know. I would have loved, and in fact, when I saw that, I thought of you, and I'm like, man, you know, what is going on here? Because there's a whole bunch of subtextual stuff going down. And I just like the way she handled herself. You know, I mean...
You liked it?
I like the way she handled herself because, I mean, basically, Matt, what do you want to say? Okay, Sarah, don't you think you should be in prison forever?
Right.
You know, and she's like, you know, jam it, Matt. I mean, that's the way I'm seeing it, right? Jam it, Matt. That's it. I did my time. I'm out. Okay.
Yeah, and she, you know, the funny thing was that she she's from West Virginia, and yet she says that her reasoning for getting involved with the SLA and for eventually shooting it forward is that she had never seen poverty like that she was seeing in the San Francisco area.
Yeah, but now, wasn't she originally incarcerated in West Virginia and she busted out?
Yeah.
And who else? Who else was incarcerated there at the same time? Was Fromm there too? Which wouldn't make any sense in a way.
I think they were at one time. In
some penal institution in West Virginia, if you go on Wikipedia, because I think they basically suck too, but you'll find some stuff that they can't screw up. I mean, it just gives you dates and facts. But I was surprised because it seemed like more than one person busted out of that place in West Virginia, and they finally had to bring her somewhere else. So there again, you wonder, how did she have the wherewithal to break out? There's a lot going on there, right? I mean, that's got to be. I wouldn't mind being like stuck in an elevator with her for a half hour.
Well, I did some research on the Kahn family. I don't know which Kahn branch she's from, but they appear to be a Cincinnati family that got into meats, big meat packing family, and they were eventually bought out by Sarah Lee, I think.
Oh, that's getting too close. Sarah Jane and Sarah Lee, that's great.
Yeah, I don't know if she's from the Kahn Meats family, but that was the only Kahn name that was in my town.
And the Kahn we're talking about is Kahn, which were known for hot dogs.
Yeah, and that was, and there was a meat distributorship like a block from her house. There wasn't a Kahn. Well, they probably had Kahn Meats there, but it wasn't specifically a Kahn meat place.
Right.
But made me think that maybe she was from that family. And if she is, then that may be a connection of some kind to Manson, because Manson was born in Cincinnati.
Cincinnati has got to be the mothership for all the strangeness that takes place in a certain circumference of the Ohio Valley. Cincinnati is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's the Masonic, the Masonic capital almost, and of course you got all the gambling that was going on right across the river.
Yeah, and the Golden Circle were big there. I mean, it's almost not like a northern town. Would you agree?
It's a German town.
Oh, that explains it.
Getting back to the calendar, I'd like to knock off May and June because there wasn't a whole lot. We found out on the 13th of May that the swine flu had sort of jumped in. That it started from a Tamiflu lab.
Oh, jeez.
At least that was what one guy was saying, and that would link, of course, to Rumsfeld. Well, he's a big investor in Tamiflu.
Well, create the problem and create the solution.
On the 13th, we also had another Montauk monster wash up on the shores of Montauk, and then in a really strange thing, suddenly we also had a Montauk toast that went up on eBay. You remember we had the Jesus toast that one of the Mothman, I guess, experiencers, you could call her, was trying to sell way back when. And now we have a Montauk. As soon as this second Montauk monster was photographed and the image was up, then suddenly you have someone making toast that looks just like it. It's almost like there's people out there that just spend their time trying to create these pieces of toast that look like other stuff and selling them.
No.
Well, that was what I thought from the beginning with the Jesus Toast lady. I was like, that's just too, she had done so many other things to get attention, or seemingly, strange events were always happening to her. It just seemed to be too much, and then suddenly she's got this toast with Jesus' face on it, and it makes you wonder if there's like a personality type out there.
Of course there is.
Yeah, cooks up stuff. And
supposedly
Sarah Jane Moore is one of these. She's been, described as someone who's a media hound, who's always trying to get attention And you could kind of sense that when she was on Matt Lyer, that she was very satisfied that she finally had made it, to a national program.
But I mean,
anyway,
you're still incarcerated, and that isn't like a great thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's something, huh?
I didn't mean to go back to her.
Yeah, and you don't want me getting off on that again. So,
yeah.
All right, well, let me rephrase that. You don't want me going back and talking about her. But I tell you what, we have to get her address so we can get her on.
Yeah, we do. We'd like to know where she is.
Yeah, and also, last thing, I swear to God, I won't say anything more. But I'm sorry, another pun. I didn't mean it. What happens to these people after they fall out of the public eye, which could be a more dangerous time for them if they've been a tool than when they were in prison or in the height of everything. And I'm being serious as a heart attack about that. I'm wondering if she'll have some fate befall her in the next year.
Oh yeah. On the 13th, we also had the Taliban attacking the Pakistani army, so you could call that a U.S. surge, and it's kind of interesting that happens on the same day as the swine flu potential release of information that the swine flu was a concoction. And then there was also a suicide of some guy named Ibn al-Libi, who, pardon me for not remembering exactly what his role was, but it had something to do with 911.
Libby?
I think. On the 14th, they found a 35,000-year-old carving in Germany, supposedly of a human body, proving that we were at least, 35,000 years old.
I feel like that every day.
We had Chrysler and GM dealership cuts coming in that day. Obama revives terror tribunals on the 15th, so he's continuing everything that had been started up by Bush. We're starting to get a clear idea at this point that Obama is not going to do anything.
Same old, man. And tribunals will become the jurisprudence system for you and me and everyone else. And that's what we're headed for. So. And
on that same day, Cheney, starts claiming that the Gitmo detainees, revealed the Iraq Al-Qaeda link.
Right. Okay.
So he and Obama were synced up. A week passes without much. Suddenly you have that fake plot in New York where the guys were going to shoot down a plane and bomb a Jewish temple on the 21st, and then they also on that day voted not to close down Gitmo. There was a shooting in Georgia.
Well, that's every day.
Yeah. Suicide bombings in Baghdad every day. Concealed guns on Texas university campuses were okayed.
By my videos.
On the 22nd, we have a story that the Tasmanian devil carries a contagious cancer. And this should remind everyone that cancer is a virus, because otherwise, how could you have a contagious cancer?
Well, you have no argument here. I just wondered if Warner Brothers is aware of that.
On the 25th, we have a North Korean nuke test and a Starbucks bombing in New York City. Sarah Jane Moore was on the Today Show on the 28th, and a new laser is unveiled at Lawrence Livermore on the 30th. In June, we have the abortion doctor shot on the 1st. An Airbus plane goes down over the Atlantic, flying to Paris from Rio.
And one other thing about that, and there's all kinds of stories that flew around that, okay, but it seems that there was a breakup midair, and I don't think anybody's getting really decent information about why that would be.
Yes, it does seem to be that kind of same scenario.
From talking to the two pilots with whom I'm familiar, one very much so, taking a lightning strike is a dangerous thing for planes, and the Airbus is fly-by-wire. It's completely electronic. It has no hydraulics. That's why Sully was very fortunate up in New York for having lost everything he lost, because there isn't a whole lot of I don't think there's any hydraulics there whatsoever, so time was of a factor. Be that as it may, without going into the whole 9 yards, that was a very fortuitous situation if those folks had to have a landing and incur that problem. But lightning causing a breakup, I don't think that is the case. It would do a lot of other damage to an Airbus, but so what's with the breakup? And nobody, I mean, all of a sudden that story's gone cold, don't you think?
It seems to, yeah.
So anyway,
it sounds like behind-the-scenes battling over contracts.
Well, certainly the Airbus hasn't had a lot of great PR lately.
Well, yeah, I mean, but they do make. I mean, if you've flown on an Airbus, they're nicer. There's plenty of room. They're designed well. I like them, and I think that somebody over here doesn't. Perhaps it's Boeing. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you'll always have. I don't see that the aviation industry wants to go totally to all electronics in what Airbus has. I think I would rather not have that happen. The fact that Airbus built what they built, it's got to certainly be more comfortable for people, especially across long hauls. That would be transatlantic and such, no doubt about it. I just don't know that if something goes wrong, you want everything based on electronics. So, but whatever it is, certainly, I think most pilots are more comfortable with what's being manufactured by Boeing.
Okay. On the 3rd, we had a UFO fleet seen over Cambridgeshire, England. 50 at least UFOs flying together. It's an interesting video. Some nuke plants were released. Locations of nuclear plants was released to the internet on the 2nd. David Carradine was found hanged on the 4th.
That's another story that's gone cold. I mean, was it really a suicide? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I know a friend who lives in L.A. who saw him standing in the road a year ago or so, in the rain, just standing in the middle of traffic. Saw David Carradine, like on Sunset Boulevard. So I don't know if that
has any bearing, right? But
if David was doing drugs or something.
Well, for somebody who's supposed to be like so in tune and in touch and with the whole thing, I thought he probably had fried a certain part of his brain.
Yeah, he's known to have done a lot of drugs, so maybe it took a toll, or who knows.
Now, where did that happen? Was that in Thailand as well?
Yeah, Bangkok.
Thailand, they got some problems there.
Yeah, and they had a lot of unrest in the previous month
yes,
or two,
did,
so
yeah.
Who knows if it's what was going on there. I mean, in the movie industry, there's a lot of shady characters, and there's, people get vendettas going. And
well, don't they do a lot of, child porn movies there?
Yeah, it's known for prostitution.
And also young prostitution.
Yeah.
No, we had an Anglo who had married a Thai and opened up a restaurant not far from where I live, and it was great. In fact, they were one of the sponsors of our old shows. You'll hear promos for a great Thai restaurant. But, man, I mean, and they both went back. I mean, that was his goal, to make a certain amount of money and go to Thailand. And he used to regale me with stories about going over there and availing himself of teenage girls. And I'm like, oh, man, don't tell me this stuff. So I looked at him when he told me he was going to go over. I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, as long as everything's peaceable, round eye will be okay. But, man, if they ever throw any kind of coup over there, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. So I don't even know if he's dead now. But anyway.
Right.
Nice little details for you.
On the 11th, we had the Holocaust Museum shooting in D.C., which is another provocation, one would say, toward making people think that the Patriot movement or the militia movement's alive and well. On the 12th, we had the Iran election fiasco, where, clearly the CIA's in there trying to mess with, depose Ahmadinejad and get the Shah's son back in.
Are they going for another? Are you serious? They want to get Shah's son in?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh God, that ain't gonna work. Okay.
The Republicans, yeah. North Korea said they were going to weaponize their nukes on the 13th. AIG refused to pay out for the Hudson River plane crash. You know, remember that one where the guy landed in the river?
Yep, and that's ongoing. That's right. They don't want to do it.
After AIG, you know,
duped all their monkey mucks with a nice bonus, which yeah, you gotta love that.
On the 23rd, you had that shooting of Nida in Iran, the woman who had nothing to do with any protests or anything, shot mysteriously while someone was filming it.
Gee,
the whole thing.
That couldn't have our hand in that, could it?
It seems like it could be a CIA thing to you know, all you need is one incident against a woman in one of these situations, and then you have all of the progressives in America on your side. So, you know, there almost is a motive for concocting any kind of, you know.
All right, but let me interject at this point. I don't think I say the legislation anymore. To take a look on thomas.loc.gov will take some time. I think I could find it. What struck me very interestingly was before any bombs fell on Iraq, which would have been in early 2003, there was legislation on the Hill that suggested we might have to, and excuse my, you know, colloquialisms, smack Iran around for the treatment of their women, blah, blah, blah. I kid you not. If I can find the House resolution, I'll get it up. I'll have to take a look. So what I'm thinking to myself...
You mean the one, are you talking about the one that allows Afghani men to demand sex?
Oh, no. This was strictly, go figure, those idiots, you know, in the District of Criminals, making a resolution that, you know, we might have to, like, get a little firm with Iran for what they do over there and also with their treatment of women. I forget what the HR number was. I'll try to find it. But what struck me was, before we ever got serious with Iraq, they were talking about this. And you can find my past shows where we're addressing that. It's like, what are you guys doing? First of all, it's none of your damn business. I mean, we don't like to see women or anywhere or any human being obviously treated like a subnoid. But what are you talking about? And I'm serious, Andy. I mean, before we ever started hitting with Iraq, they were yakking about Iran.
Yeah.
And so here we are, you know, what, 6 years down the road, and, you know, it's
that kind of proves the point, that's the best way. I mean, you can have any Democrat you want running on a totally pacifist
platform,
and the minute that they can point to some woman being harmed somewhere, suddenly all the liberals here are like, yeah, well, I guess our pacifist Dem is going to have to do something here.
And here's another thing also. There was a Democrat show out of Sarasota. I'm not going to name it because I don't want anybody going there. I'm not going to give these assholes any kind of publicity. But I went, and I would be. It's a long story. When I was at the AM stations here, we partnered with them, blah, blah, blah. He was on my show. I was on his show. And I told him, I said, look, it doesn't matter, Democrat or Republican. I'm saying we're never getting out of the Middle East. Forget it, because that's the plan for the future. And, oh, no. Well, here we are. And you're absolutely right. I mean, he used to say, I know you think both parties are the same. I'm like, no, I don't think they're the same. My point is they play different parts that will lead to the same end. That's the point. And so here we are again. And, of course, they'll say, well, we had to do this because of such and such. I understand that. There's always a reason to do it. My bottom line is we're not getting out of the Middle East, never until WW3. And so here we go. So you're right, Andy. I mean, Obama, yeah, fine. Well, he had to do that because X, Y, and Z happened. I understand. Bottom line, we ain't getting out. And now for what? May 17th?
Yeah.
Those pregnant pauses are killing me, man. I don't know if you passed out or walked out, All right, go ahead.
Well, on the 23rd, we also had the D.C. Metro train crash, which killed the General Worley, who was somehow involved in 911, their 911 response. We had the U.S. drone missile attacked a funeral in Pakistan on the 24th. And it's like, how can people... I'm sorry, I just don't agree that it's a good idea to be bombing people's funerals.
No, that would kind of be
drone missiles.
Yeah, that would be a deal killer for me.
On the 30th, another Airbus disappeared over the Indian Ocean. And also, Cynthia McKinney was arrested, and a bunch of people were arrested for trying to deliver aid to Gaza on a ship. And I don't know whatever happened with that. It kind of disappeared.
Well, who took him prisoner? Israeli Navy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there was a Honduran coup on the 1st of July.
It's still going on.
Sarah Palin was in Vanity Fair. There was a U.S. surge in Afghanistan on the 3rd. And then a bunch of deaths here in the next week. John Keel, everybody.
Yeah, there must have been like 24.
Yeah, a cyber attack on the White House, supposedly, coming from North Korea on the 8th. And then on the 9th, the Dems are saying that the CIA deceived Congress for years. So how could we, that's why we voted, to invade Iraq and all this stuff. Anyway, that was Thursday. Well, that gets us caught up on that calendar. One thing I could add about that, the number 11 thing that we were talking about before, the sun has an 11-year cycle. I'm looking now just at random notes that I've made. So, if the sun has an 11-year cycle, is that what's behind the Masonic interest in the number 11? And could it be that because I have heard, and I think it was Keel that researched this, that there's the same year cycle with the paranormal events, and that the paranormal events seem to peak when the Earth's magnetism is low. And I'm assuming that when the sun's flares are down, that would mean less magnetism. No, when the solar flares are high, that probably means magnetism is low on the Earth, because it's always reciprocal. If one side of the equation is on the downside, the other one's on the increase. So
right.
One would think that during the solar flares, and assuming that they run on an 11-year cycle, would be a higher time of more psychic activity. And of course, this goes back to the mound thing, that if a mound has a really great difference in magnetism from low to high, that it's the difference that causes potential visions of creatures and things. And so it could be, that every 11 years there's a shift from low to high, and it's at these shift points in magnetism that you have a little window there for seeing creatures and things. And the Masons seem to know this.
But don't you think this has been known from the foundations of the Earth? I mean, I don't, using the word pagan or whatever, and I don't necessarily mean it pejoratively, but I mean just, I don't know, being pantheist or whatever. I mean, for right or wrong, or for whatever you believe spiritually, folks were in tune with, obviously, the cycles, the whole idea of nature and everything. Now, what you want to worship is one thing. That's fine. But, I mean, so don't you think, though, that this has gone on forever? I mean, people had to be in tune with what was going on around them, because what else was there as far as markers, if you know what I mean? They knew things happened in certain repetitive forms.
Well, I think, and I think that the Masons, secret societies figure this out, and one has to wonder now if they're also doing other things at these key moments. Are they changing the way that they do their coverage in the media to coincide with changes in magnetism?
Well, let me ask you this, and playing devil's advocate for the most part, what about magnetism? Like, why is that a big deal, Andy?
I guess you'd have to be a scientist to really answer it, but it does affect the brain, and obviously it affects the brain because all of these experiments have been done.
But aren't most health people, this is my understanding, lamenting the fact that the ground has lost a great deal of magnetism, like a certain amount of magnetism is a good thing? All right, I mean,
the body has the body likes to run at a certain level of hertz.
Agreed. That's right. We do have a frequency too.
Yeah, and we got those frequencies, and they've exhaustively researched, what different frequencies do to either the brain or the body. Frequencies can cause cancer. They could remotely. There's a possibility that they could, just beam something at you that would cause cancer.
And also, I think I'm right in saying this with the Royal Rife technology, that frequencies could eradicate disease.
Yes.
So if it's all about that, okay. So I mean, and that's where I'm leading. I'm not, not to trap you. I have any slant on this, but that everything is full of frequencies, and I assume, and of course I'm butchering this, but magnetism is part of the deal.
One of the things about the Masons is that their interest in alchemical processes is not so much about transforming metals.
Okay.
I mean, they do that. They do that in their corporations, nowadays, like Carbide and so forth. But it's always really been about transforming the mass mind. And they do this by using the left-right debate, the Democrat-Republican debate, the fake,
liberal, conservative, left and right,
Hegelian dialectic.
Right.
But I do think it may be linked somehow to the sun cycle as to what they decide to do when. We do know that hypnosis, like in hypnosis, the way to increase the trance is that you have tests where you stop for a moment and then you test the person to see, where they're at. And usually there's confusion is introduced to deepen the trance, which we've talked about before. There's been some startling examples of that. and just one that I thought of that has to do with 911 was that the fact that Bush Sr. announced on 9/11/1990 that, he made the New World Order comments. And then 11 years later, and there's the number 11 again, they have the 911 attacks on 911. And that was maybe a test in a sense. Bush announcing openly, that they were.
Yeah, that was kind of like the inauguration. Yeah, the kickoff to the whole deal.
Yeah, let's see if people react, or you desensitize them to what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I didn't pay any attention to that. The only thing that caught me funny about that speech with the 1,000 points of light, and I'm like, what? That's a little funky. And of course, I was, I hadn't begun, my trip down the rabbit hole.